Last week we thought about who are we going to be as we continued our series Hit the Ground Listening, and we got loads of beautiful pictures in of you as babies because we were thinking about us being children of God. The one of Ali Bacon with her freckles and bright ginger hair was electrifying. This week we're thinking about what are we going to do, and I'd planned this talk to do it in the building, but then 3 of my lovely children were hit with COVID, and so we're self-isolating until next Wednesday. And there's so many things that we wanted to do that we can't. Megan dancing with her friend she's danced with for 14 years that last time. Joe going to a work do, Amos's last day at school, a funeral that I was going to be doing on Wednesday that I can't, marrying Adrian and Tabitha this afternoon at church, which I can't. Reading out the list of those that have died at Tonbridge Angels at the AGM on Friday, which I couldn't do, and so many more things. A football competition that Noah and I were going to be in and I was going to speak at. It would have been brilliant to have played football with my son, but alas, we can't do that. But we are, let's remember, human beings and not human doings. You may have heard of the Protestant work ethic. It was a good thing in the day because it basically said that we as Protestants, as Christians, will work hard for God. The problem is, I think, in our day and age, God has slipped to the edges of the thinking, and so now it's just I just work hard, but it's not for anyone's glory, it's just for more money, more kudos, to make myself feel better, whatever it may be. So let's remember we are human beings, not human doings. Andy Stanley, a minister in America, said that there is a tyranny of ought to. I ought to do that, or I ought to do this, or I ought to do that for that person. And sometimes we end up doing things like Megan filming this for me now, even though she's got COVID, because we feel we ought to. And I thank you, Megan, it's very kind of you. I love that little smile, it's not changed since you were 1. But we can't live our lives as human doings thinking I ought to do all these things. And there were plenty of things for Paul, the writer of many of the New Testament letters, that he couldn't do because he was under house arrest in prison. I showed you this painting by Rembrandt of him a few weeks ago, and just the longing look in Paul's eyes that Rembrandt has captured, because he wants to be with his churches, doing things with them and being with them. And in the letter to the Philippian church, Paul says, do all things without murmuring and arguing, so that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, in which you shine like stars in the world. In a minute, when I sit somewhere else in the garden, why don't we unpack that passage of scripture together? In this passage, Paul says, do all things without murmuring. Murmuring can mean grumbling, low and suppressed discussion. You ever heard that around you and you think, what are they moaning about? Complaint, secret and sullen discontent. It's not a positive word, is it? And do it without arguing as well, so that you may be, and the word be there isn't use of finished article, it's to be made into, to be formed, to become, to come to oneself. So it's something that is continually happening and we never reach the end. He said, so that you may be blameless. That's without defect. That's not singular. That's not about your personal piety, if you like. It's as a church culture that we will be blameless as a church and innocent. That means without mixture of vice and deceit. It's sincere and blameless. Do you remember in Matthew 10:16 when Jesus said that we should be as innocent as doves? Innocent. Children of God without blemish, no rebuke in us, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. Crooked there means torturous, it's peevish, it's morose, it's not a positive word, and perverse is twisted, distorted, turned away. It's not a narrow way that we may think of perverse, it's far wider than that. Don't be a crooked and perverse generation in which you shine. Shine there means to bring to light, to make visible and obvious to the senses. Think of Jesus in John's Gospel saying, I am the light of the world. God is called the Father of lights. Angels are called heavenly lighted beings. They are like stars in the world. Paul's hearers, as they'd heard this, these Philippian Jewish Christians, would have known their Bible, which was the Old Testament. And they would have remembered, as Paul said, do everything without murmuring and arguing, that the Jewish people in the wilderness, led by Moses, did the exact opposite. Moses, towards the end of his life when he's dying, he has some straight words for them. He says in Deuteronomy 31:29, "For I know that after my death you will surely act corruptly, turning aside from the way that I have commanded you. In time to come, trouble will befall you, because you will do what is evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger through the work of your hands." God can get angry. It's okay for God to get angry. It would be weird if he didn't. Some of the things in the world, wouldn't it? And Moses is basically saying, look, I've walked with you for 40 years. I've heard your murmuring and your arguing, and I know that you're going to carry on like that. Later in the next chapter he says, "The rock, his work is perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God without deceit, just and upright is he. Yet his degenerate children have dealt falsely with him, a perverse and crooked generation." Another echo there to the words that Paul uses in that Philippian passage. And then in Exodus chapter 16 it says, "So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." And in Numbers 11 he says, "Now when the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled." God doesn't like us arguing and murmuring. It makes him angry. But doesn't it for you when people argue and murmur around you? In your household, when there's discontent and people are having these low, suppressed, sullen, torturous talks, it doesn't make for a good vibe in the house, does it? Now, the Philippians weren't complaining against God, although the Israelites in the wilderness were in those Moses passages. They were complaining about others. There was a plague of disputes being settled in the Gentile courts, and that's not the way Jesus wants us to do it. He wants us to sort it out face to face as followers of him. And they were also complaining against each other. In chapter 4 of this passage, Paul says, "I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord." What shall we do? Murmuring and arguing. Sadly, that is quite prevalent in the church as it is in the world. And sadly, the church is often known for what it's against, not what it's for what we don't like rather than what we celebrate. I wish we could move that so that we're known for the things that we celebrate and the things we're passionate about and things we're excited for. Please hear me. I'm not saying that we shouldn't stand up against justice and say that some things are wrong. Absolutely we should. But some of the things that we're known to be against aren't that glorifying for Jesus. Can I just say to you, if you're new to TBC, our culture here is that email is used for information and encouragement. It's never used for complaint or correction. That's our dream and our desire, because that just leads into one-sided discussions that are about murmuring and arguing. If we've got a problem with someone, we talk face to face. Email, encouragement, information only. My dad said to me many years ago, "I've never had an argument with your mother." He said, "She argues, I sit in the room while she does, but I'm never involved in the argument." He was tongue-in-cheek there, but we all have some arguments, don't we, that wound us, where the wounds don't heal and turn to scars but remain open. There may be someone in TBC who, if you see that they sit on that side of the church, you come in and you sit on the other side because you don't want anything to do with them. This can be real in church, it can be real in friendships, and it can be real in families. Paul says in this passage in Philippians 2 that if we murmur and if we argue, we are no longer blameless, that we are to some degree to be blamed for what's going on. We have a chance. There is a moment in every conversation where we can think, shall I say this? Shall I murmur? And shall I argue, or shall I step back? I was on the phone with someone yesterday and they went to say something and they went, no, I'm not going to say that. No, I'm not going to say that. And they said it about 3 times because part of them really wanted to murmur to me and to moan and to get into something, to moan about someone else, and then they just pulled back from it. If we murmur and argue, Paul says we aren't innocent. We aren't those doves. If we murmur and argue, we're still children of God, but we have blemishes. Paul says that if we murmur and argue, we look like that crooked and perverse generation. There's no difference. And we need to look different to the world around us, otherwise people won't see Jesus in us. Now, please hear me clearly here. I'm not saying that Christians, people who follow Jesus, are much better than everyone else. Someone I know who started working in people's houses and in their gardens said to me, I've worked for loads of people that aren't Christians yet, and I've realised for the first time what really lovely people they are. I remember being in our youth group here when I was about 15, and Derek Hills was leading us in a discussion, and at that time I didn't think my nan was a follower of Jesus. I found out after she died that she was. She just wasn't welcomed into her local church, and so watched songs of praise instead and read her Bible. But in that discussion I said to Derek, my nan, just because I'm a Christian, it doesn't mean I'm better than her. She could be as nice as me. And Derek leant forward with his big hair and said, or she could be even nicer. And it hit me. How arrogant was I being, thinking that just because I followed Jesus, I was automatically nicer than someone else. If we murmur and argue, we don't shine like stars in the world. It's as simple as that. I went for a walk with someone from TBC a few weeks back, and as soon as he met me, he said to me, Neil, how can I encourage and support you? It put a completely different tone on the whole conversation, because I immediately felt loved. I felt encouraged. No murmuring, no arguing in what that person was doing. So how can we stop murmuring and arguing? Most of us probably know the story, the parable of the prodigal son in Luke 15. And maybe we remember that there's a couple of parables before that. But do we remember why Jesus told that parable? In Luke 15, 1-2, it says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. What was Jesus' response? Jesus' response to these religious leaders who were murmuring and arguing was to tell them 3 stories that all had the same theme. He told them a story about a shepherd that lost one of his 100 sheep, and he left the 99 and went and found the one, and when he found him, celebrated. Then he told them about a woman. Interesting, isn't it, that God is painting as a woman in that picture? And she loses one of her 10 coins, and she sweeps the house until she finds the coin, and then there is great joy. And then he tells the story of 2 sons, one who takes his share of the inheritance, runs away, blows it, whilst the other one, the older son, stays at home and works hard. And when the younger son comes home, the father runs towards him, welcomes him home, doesn't even let him repent. He forgives him before that. Put that in your theological matrix and see how it works out. And then he throws a party for him. He celebrates. All of those that were lost are celebrated by the shepherd, the widow, the woman and the father. And then the older brother comes in and he refuses to go into the party and celebrate. And so the father comes out to him and says, come on in. And Jesus leaves it hanging there, saying to those murmuring, arguing religious leaders, so you're going to come in and shine like stars in this world, or are you going to stay outside? Jesus is saying we have a God who finds lost things, a God who finds the lost things that you haven't experienced that you hoped you would in this pandemic, those lost feelings that we long to have again. We have a God who finds lost people like you and like me. How do we stop murmuring and arguing? I think we look at the big picture. always come back to, why am I doing what I'm doing? I'm not doing it because I ought to. I'm not doing it because of some Protestant work ethic where God walked out of the door in people's thinkings years ago. I'm doing it because we believe in a God who finds lost things and rejoices over them being found. What am I saying? Simply put, let's major on the major things and let's minor on the minor. Too often in the church, we have majored on minor issues and we have got sidetracked and we've been known for what we're against, not what we're for, and we have minored on the major things. If we were to celebrate somebody finding Jesus in the way that we sometimes celebrate other things, like England scoring 2 goals in the Euro final, oh, they didn't, did they? Then maybe the world would be a different place. Let's major on the major, minor on the minor. How, Neil? Practically, the people you disagree with, listen to them, lean into them, and learn from them, rather than just disagreeing with them and casting them aside. Say, why do I disagree with this person and how can I learn from them? That would be a good way for us to do things as Christians. The old preacher who's long gone now, Fred Craddock, said, beyond the tendency to become defensive, beyond the tendency to react to the world, the church is to respond in the manner of Jesus Christ, who was a servant in behalf of the world. As we live in the world, as we do things for Jesus and for one another and for ourselves, let's do it without murmuring and without arguing.